Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Podnuts Pro. I am your host, Marvin B. Today, I got the intro right. So for those of you mocking me after last week's fiasco, gotcha. So we have I'm going to say a pretty good show for you today. I am joined by Damien Stevens, CEO with Servosity. Damien, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing incredibly well. Thanks for having me, Marvin.
All right, incredibly well. That's usually not the answer I hear.
It's everybody's going through different times now. I'm just fortunate that we're able to help MSPs and get to talk to you.
All right. Well, good to have you on the show today. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, maybe Podnuts Pro is a podcast for techs that we hope to help you support your businesses. We hopefully will help you provide better, stronger, and faster support. We talk with vendors that will provide products and services. And as techs, we share stories and tips, hoping that we can all make each other better. Today, as you can tell, we have a vendor, but we are going to be talking a little bit generically about managed backup solutions because I'll be honest, I have seen a couple of conversations lately in the groups with people arguing about what is needed in a true managed backup solution. And Servosity is a company that has been calling me, and full disclaimer, I don't use them, but we've talked. And as many of you know, I am a creature of habit. So I don't really like to change, and that's really the reason. It's not that Servosity is bad or Servosity is better than anybody else. I don't, we're going to talk about that. But the bottom line is we're going to find out what's really the items that you should be doing in your backup. And then we will let Servosity pimp themselves because I can be swayed. So we'll see how that goes.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Damien, so now that I've done the intro, let me go back, and now that you said you were doing incredibly well, let me ask, how are things with you and your company during COVID-19?
When I say incredibly well, right, that's not just some, hyperbole, super fantastic type of thing. We're very blessed that we saw people quit making decisions when everybody went home. So we didn't have new people signing on. That kind of hit pause for a moment. But, we knew that our partners loved what we do and that they need it, right? It's not a nice to have, but, COVID really proved it, right? We had a couple partners that were in the wrong industry, hospitality or something that really had a tough time of it. But the typical MSP, is pretty diverse. And, the typical MSP that, at least from our vantage point, did well. Right, that's a broad generalization, right? You guys, if you are MSPs, you understand. Some of you guys are thriving. Some of you guys are really struggling, depending on industry and the size and geography. But our business did well because MSPs did well, and so we were fortunate that we didn't see any downturn. We saw a pause for a little while, and then we have seen tons of growth. So we saw a pause in terms of growth, but we're now on track for better than what we had thought beginning of the year in terms of growth. And we spent some of that, what you might call as downtime, when nobody was doing too many things, like you guys were all busy setting everybody up to work from home and that kind of stuff, and just, keeping the lights on. And, even when we reached out to see if we could help, the answer I was getting was not unless you're going to go set up Suzy for remote access, So we knew, it wasn't even the good time to talk to our existing partners. So we put our heads down. We came out with 2 major releases since COVID, and we we did a work from home offer, or during kind of COVID times, where we gave away the ability to do free backup for your clients if you're an MSP. So we said there's a few things we can control, and we're going to go work on those. Most things we can't, and we're going to go work on the very few that we can. So we went out and tried to be valuable in the new capabilities, and then the ability to protect your clients without asking for extra money during this time has proven to be valuable. And then where we are now is, it seems like the two things that companies are buying, they can't afford to not buy, is cybersecurity and backup or DR. And so since we're in the latter, it's a very busy time, and it's very different though, right? I talked to some MSPs. I would say the typical MSP I talk to, they're not growing. They're happy that the revenues are staying the same and they're keeping their clients, but they're not really adding. And I think that's a function because the typical MSP goes and meets people locally and goes to networking events, and nobody knows when those will return. So
right.
For most MSPs, I think that growth has slowed. And the value I'm going to try to speak from is not that I know things. It's just that I know hundreds of other MSPs that I talk to regularly that know things. And so I try to bring that knowledge to bear to help our existing partners, and I'm happy to bring that here. So a few of them have figured out how to grow during COVID and are growing really nicely. And then, you may be aware of this, Marvin, but some of the bigger MSPs, they're not hitting their growth plans. And, some of the really large MSPs, I mean, somebody might lose their job, they have a professional CEO that's not a founder kind of thing. And so I've heard a lot of ours say that, they're getting a lot of offers to be acquired. So, I think if you can't get the growth by just adding companies, then some of these larger ones are trying to, roll up MSPs. So
right.
MSP is not going away. It just may change.
Right. Now, I know that a couple of months ago, I had on Jay McBain from Forza Research, and we talked about the impact of COVID on the MSP and how, a lot of them were going to find a little, bump in the road because, some customers were going to have to, pull back and wanted to save some money. And you're right, those ones that were trying to grow, probably couldn't do so, but although some could. Let me ask this question, and this wasn't, I obviously didn't prep you for this, but
that's the fun part.
So, I mean, even though you said that, you didn't go out and, you weren't growing or anything like that, did you have MSPs coming to you and saying, hey, can we bump to a lower plan? Can we reduce costs? Can you put us on hold? Did you have any of that?
We had a small percentage of that. The ones that did that were entirely focused on one industry, like hospitality, that just disappeared overnight. And then they just said, hey, they need their data, but they're not actually using it. They don't have any people working. Like, they don't really want to pay us, and therefore it's hard for me to pay you. Like, what can we do? So we had to have some interesting and challenging conversations. And so we couldn't always bend as far as everyone wanted, but I'd rather bend and keep a relationship and a partnership than stay to the letter of the law. But that was by far the minority. A lot, in my experience, the MSPs have been impacted, but far less than any other part of the economy, right? And I think the reason is you guys are typically pretty diverse. So, if you had 3 hospitality clients, then maybe they all went away. But if you had 97 others, then you probably weren't impacted like a lot of companies that are, 60% down on revenue and making headcount reductions. So, so we've had that sort of thing, and we've had others that were considering layoffs or furloughs that, were able to redirect the people and have them work on something else. And, most of the MSPs I talked to, they got really busy with all the work from home. But if they were under a managed services plan, they often didn't make more money from it. They just got busy. So, so you had that kind of stuff go on. Most, in my experience, there are some, people that try to squeeze every dime out or let people go or do things, but most of them are good, hardworking people that are just trying to keep their team employed and their customers taken care of. And so that's what we saw. And things are changing. There's way more work from home. There will always be probably, and the need for backup DR became far more evident, and the cybersecurity threats, have escalated significantly. So, a lot of new realities. And that's personally where we've seen is, like, I'd say the typical MSP is not adding new customers, but they have customers that are still adding things. They've got to pay for additional remote access or invest in cybersecurity or that sort of thing. But we're seeing a lot of the big ticket items, pushback, server refresh, all that. So you just have to go where your client wants you to.
Right. So I didn't want to start off with price at the beginning, but of course that had a big impact over the last few months. And I know that there were friends of mine who, when they were looking to cut costs, and, not necessarily that they had to, but in preparing for the long haul, thinking, okay, let me trim some now, in terms of backup, my philosophy has been, solidified over the last few years that I've got to keep all the components of backup. I'm not going to cut corners or anything like that. So I've got, both local and cloud backup for my clients. Most of them, most of my clients are law firms, by the way. So most of them
have a lot to lose if you get that wrong.
Yeah. Although the good part was they considered themselves essential workers, whether they were, whether they were or not. So they kept working. But you're right. It's they are quite demanding. So if they can't find, some document, some deposition transcript or whatever, it's a big problem. Mm-hmm. So that was why when I started, really getting into backup, I wanted to make sure we had local and cloud. I want to make sure we had an appliance so they could, get restores quickly. I wanted to make sure that we had virtualization so that if a server crashed, they didn't have to wait 24 to 72 hours to get a new device and then restore or anything like that. So those were the types of things that I started depending on. And then a big thing I really wanted was support behind me, because I didn't want to have to be the person who at 10 p.m. or, 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, if there was an issue with the backup, I wanted somebody to be able to help me get that back right away. So those were the few things that I, say it had to be part of my backup. But let me ask you, what are some of these essential things that we have to have as part of our managed backup plans?
Yeah, I think you nailed the stuff that should be table stakes. It still surprises me that I do run into MSPs or that are like, really, you can virtualize a server? Like, that's been a thing for a number of years. We didn't invent it, and the guys you're using didn't invent it. It's been around for a while, and not only virtualization, but even from backup. So yeah, that's when I say table stakes, not everybody does it though, and this may be pickiness in the wording, but I tend to think of sometimes you need backup, sometimes you really need either DR or business continuity, and I try to talk about those differently, because the way I view it is, why are you spending any money, right? To me, backup is just about recovering your data, right? And so you got to be able to look your client in the eye and tell them, no matter the eventuality, I can recover your data. I can get you that deposition file. And that's what backup, if you do it right, should solve, right? At the end of the day, I've got it local, I've got it in the cloud. But when I say backup, I'm thinking file and database level, not imaging, not the DR business continuity. So, backup in my mind is typically the cheaper of those two. And there's also scenarios, cost aside, why you need, backup, right? If they're running, if they don't have a server and all their data stored on your, Buffalo, your Synology, or whatever brand you love, NAS, then you're going to run a backup. You're not going to run an image of your NAS. So there's use cases for backup even today. And so, but usually backup is, more commoditized, whether it should or shouldn't be. There are still some differences, but it is the cheaper of the options. And the problem people have with backup is, they like that it costs less, but your recovery time is usually days or weeks, because you can download their data, but you got to buy a new server or buy a new NAS. And I mean, if you got 50 gigs, then everything's easy. But, now that, companies often have, 2, 3, 20, 50 terabytes, you don't want to store that file by file. You're talking days or weeks to restore, or, the long pull in the 10 in that scenario is usually buying another server. You hope HP or Dell or whoever you buy it from can get it to you quickly. But I mean, you guys, if you saw any of this, like, not many people were ordering them, but if you had to order a new piece of equipment, there was huge delays in the supply chain while COVID was going on. So
I'm sorry. I'm dealing with that right now. This very
Really?
minute.
Really?
I have 11 packages that are sitting in a warehouse a city over. This is day 19.
Wow. Yeah, right. Well, I think we never thought this would happen, but we had a place where I feel like the trucking industry almost shut down, and everything almost quit coming. So, I hope that never happens, right? But the idea that you can always get a server in 3 days delivered no matter what is just not guaranteed. And so, you can have next business day on site, hardware warranties if you like to try to mitigate that. But even in those cases, sometimes they weren't able to fulfill that where they normally would be able to. So in my mind, you got backup. Usually backup is, I want recovery of something that's not easy to image, or I'm unwilling to pay for essentially DR, which is what you should have in most cases. And I don't mean that because it's self-serving, which it is, but I mean that because most people, if you sell them the $20 a month plan, they'll love you today, and when it comes to recovery, they will leave you. They will go somewhere else because you're going to take a week, and no matter what you told them originally, they're going to forget that, and they're going to say, "Why am I down for a week staring at you?" Right. So you're going to want to pay for a good, reputable DR, like one of the ones you're using, like Servosity, and have that in place. And the reason I say that is people will sometimes mix those, and what you're getting for $20 a month is not what you're getting for $100 a month or whatever it may be. They're vastly different. And so, like you said, the real DR solutions have the ability to store the data locally and in the cloud. And, the big thing that I feel like some MSPs miss is you need to test both of those. And, everybody wants to, and I think everybody agrees they should, they just don't always get around to it. Right. And my point is, by testing it, you should be able to virtualize it locally, right? So if they have, whether it's one server or 20 and they crash, you should be able to spin that up on a server locally, whether that's any server like we allow you to do, or an appliance that one of the companies sells you. Whatever you need to do, you need to be able to do that at a moment's notice. And then, I feel like our industry sells the cloud as a silver bullet, and the cloud is great for certain things and not great for others. Storage, cheap storage, it's good for. Security, it's good for. But it's not that I think they won't be able to spin it up. We'll be able to spin it up. Our competitors will be able to spin the server up. But I've seen so many MSPs have never tested it, and they don't really understand how it works, or they haven't thought through it. So, the worst case scenario, we had an MSP that came to us from a competitor, and the competitor said, "Don't worry when you crash. If your local device gets encrypted and ransomwared, which is what happened, then you can launch in the cloud." The vendor did what they said. They spun the server up in the cloud. They said, "Don't worry, you can connect via the VPN." They allowed them to connect via VPN. The problem is the MSP tried to let the customer run QuickBooks across a VPN. And you're making the face that I would expect, but I say that because QuickBooks tells you that's not supported, and if you try it, it won't work generally. Like QuickBooks is one of the few applications that uses that gigabit network. So unless your client happens to have a fiber gigabit connection or better with low latency, then, which is not the market most of us serve, then it's probably not going to work over a VPN. So, I can't blame that vendor. I'm not going to name who it was to try to talk bad about him. But the MSP never tested it. And the MSP said, "Don't worry, we've got this." and the vendor spun up the server, and they connect to the VPN, and then they told the customer just connect over the VPN and do your work. They couldn't. The MSP got fired. So if they had done one test, they wouldn't be fired. So, it's not that you should. Hopefully, as an industry, it's not that that there's dishonesty. It's not that they were misled. It's just that it's not quite a silver bullet. You do need to test. You got to think about the apps your clients are running and how they're going to access them, or running in the, having a server running in the cloud is of no good if you can't get to it.
Or
novel
if it's
concept.
Right. Or if it's too slow for the customer. That was one of my large law firms. They had at the time 60 people in house running a client management system off a database, SQL Server. And, it took me a while to convince them you need a local appliance on site that has the engine to run this. Because there is no way that 60 of you are going to connect in the cloud and be happy with that performance.
Right.
Because at the time they were running off, a broadband connection, and the lowest one at that. And I love my Comcast, but that wasn't going to cut it. So they got fiber connection and they got an on-site appliance. Now their SQL Server, let me knock on something here, hasn't gone down.
Right.
But their SharePoint database did. And they use that thing all the time. It's their homepage for their Internet Explorer. And I actually had to spin that up and run it. And, they were down for maybe 10 minutes. And that was a time that I could actually say to them, this is why you made this purchase and not one of the other ones. And so once they saw that, they were like, okay, we get it. And, I was able to order a new server and, get it set up and then restore stuff. And, they had minimal downtime.
Well, Marvin, it sounds like you figured out what some MSPs haven't. I've talked to some of ours recently about, I get it, you're on a spectrum. And what I mean by that is your ability to convince customers to pay for things. You might be on a 1 or a 10 in there, or you might be, like most people, somewhere towards the middle. And there's always a client that's going to refuse no matter what. But, and so, there's different strategies to having maybe that's why you have 2 different offerings. I don't know, but a lot of our partners have realized, and it sounds like maybe you have, I'd love to hear your input, is what they've been sharing with me is, they realize that if they don't enforce essentially a minimum, and they let the client do something that is a really bad IT decision, especially around backup or DR, that they're going to get fired for that later. So you might charge them a little less per month because you let them go with a super cheap solution, the consumer grade backup that you can't really manage well, and your recovery time is weeks, and you call an 800 number or whatever that might look like. But that's how you're going to get fired. So a lot of them have evolved to this is the minimum I can do, and if you're unwilling to do this or that, then I really can't be your MSP. What are your thoughts on that?
So let me be real honest.
Okay.
You're right. The fact that I have 2 solutions is simply because not everybody can be convinced to spend the more money to get the better solution. There are people that they are like, you know what? I don't want to spend that much money. I just need to be able to have this. And whatever level this is, that's what that's what I put as the minimum. And, I do have to lay out, you realize that if we're going to do just this, if you go down, you're going to be down for a while. And, most of my customers, some of them are older, so that, they're not as, what's the phrase that they use? I'm not technologically savvy,
Right.
So, some of them, as long as they have something tangible to where they know that as long as I have my data, I'm good. So from that perspective, the lower offering that I have will at least do that.
So is your less expensive offering what I would call backup, right? Not the ability to virtualize.
Yes, backup only.
Backup only, and your more expensive is DR. Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's the thing. Like that's a better strategy. So, in my opinion, I'd love to hear yours. The worst strategy you could take, and I have talked to owners of MSPs with 20 or more employees, so not necessarily your smaller operations, that still will manage whatever the customer happen to have, right? So let me get your input on that, right? What are your thoughts on just instead of dictating it's either A or B and here's one of the two, I'll manage whatever you happen to have in place. So
Interesting. I have not had to deal with that in quite some time. The last time I did was, so actually they're now my largest client, and they were using, and it was a business product. It was a cloud only product, and it was backup only. And the reason that they wanted to switch was because of price. They were paying, they were paying by the gig or whatever. And this was, a law firm with 2 offices, and they were replicating data back and forth, doing VPN drives. So they had, I believe at the time, it was like 2 terabytes in one office and 1 in another office. So the price actually got up there.
Okay.
And I came to them with a solution that for about the same price, and it was actually a little bit less. I said, look, you're not going to really get cheaper if you want to do what you're telling me, because they wanted to be able to be up and running. They wanted to be able to restore stuff fast. And I said, well, even with your current solution, how long does it take to restore stuff? And it's like, well, however fast the internet is. And I said, well, then we need to put something local in. And so it was, at the beginning, it was less, and I got them a local appliance, but I got them better retention, because most of those products are either 30 or 90-day retention. So I got them a year. They didn't want to pay for more than that, but they at least had a year retention. It was both local and cloud. So that worked for them. But in terms of, all my other clients, there are a few, and they're usually the older clients, my longest clients. I mean, some of mine I've had 20 plus years, and, they're just waiting to retire now.
Yeah.
So they're those people that are, look, as long as I have something. But so in the last 5 years, we've always ripped out what was there. And I told them, and basically it's to say, look, in order for me to do it right, from my perspective, in order for me to be able to, have insight into it, to make sure it runs every night, to test it periodically, then I need to put it in my dashboard or on my client. And most of them have said okay. The ones that have not said okay are not my clients. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. That makes a lot of sense. Surprisingly, some MSPs, even like I was saying, 20 employee MSPs, will take and inherit and manage whatever they have. And I know it's work to put in something standardized, and sometimes they don't just accept that, like you were saying. That it might be more, it might be less money, but the majority of the MSPs I talk to that are willing to have a candid conversation have a lot going on, and even 2 systems is plenty. It's like if you want to let your customer be on O365 or G Suite, fine, but 20 different collaboration and email and chat systems is more than you can understand and be confident at. And same thing with backup or DR. You're not going to have a consistent view of what's going on. And so, yeah, the ones, every once in a while I'm surprised there's still ones that either let the customer dictate or for a variety of reasons. Like you're down to 2. You got your, I'm not willing to pay more, it sounds like, and your backup, and then you got your DR, which is what you'd love everybody to have if price wasn't an object.
Right.
And that makes a lot of sense. But you got people that will inherit what the customer has, which is, to me, the worst strategy. Then you have the other people that have 3, 4, 5 backup companies that they work with.
Right.
And
but that's almost a different discussion that has, because from my perspective, at least when I've heard that happen, it has, that's more of, I just want to get my foot in the door,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to disrupt the client. So me getting in the door as easy as possible, and we'll just go with what they have, just to keep the status quo.
Yeah.
Which, I understand what you're saying, and the fact that, I don't like that approach either. If,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm not going to go in and leave something unless it's as good or better, than what I have now. For instance, if it's I'm not going to go in and tell them to rip out servers or switches or firewalls or stuff like that. But there are some MSPs that, this is our firewall, take it or leave it.
Right.
This is our
Yeah, you
backup,
gotta
take it or
you
leave
gotta
it.
pick your battles, right? You generally can't rip out everything and tell them to change
Right.
everything. But that's just what I'm saying is pick your battles. And the reason I say this is to get your input, but also the hundreds of MSPs that I personally have worked with myself, the ones that grow the fastest and consistently, they don't manage more than two. They pick two. And maybe, like, you mentioned you're happy generally, like maybe not perfect with what you're doing now, but you're happy and you don't love to change. A lot of MSPs like shiny new things and they switch a lot, and so I'd rather be in your camp than the other way around, so you don't want to go too long to make sure you're not too far behind in what you can do to take care of your customer. But, a lot of people evaluate this once a year or maybe twice a year. That might be healthy. Like, you don't need to be looking for something every other month. And you don't need to end up with 5 of them because you're trying to please every customer edge case.
Right.
And I only say that not in a self-serving way, right? Use the 2 you're using and not us. It's better off than using us plus 1 plus the 2 you got, plus, that you're spread too thin. You don't really know what's going on. And what I'm saying is the companies that grow the fastest, not with us, but in terms of their actual headcount and revenue, they're not doing that. They're just not doing that. There's the anomaly that made it to 20 employees that's still doing it but they're having real struggles. So the ones that are actually growing, they got to pick the battles to standardize on something. Maybe it's not the firewall, but it's their security and their backup, or something like that.
Yeah. So, and listen, I will say this. I try to make the tough stand. Like, I don't like to change. Well, I don't. But, if I have to change, I will.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is something that, I'm not the big shiny gadget guy. Like, I don't run out and get the latest, iPhone or Android phone. I'm like 2 versions behind.
Right. That's bad for a tech guy. That's like horrible, right?
It's horrible. I get made fun of all the time.
Right.
But I kind of am the same way in my products. I get them that work,
Mm-hmm.
and I stay with them until they don't work.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's, based on price, if I can find something that does the exact same thing better for less, then I'll switch. And, like I said, I don't mind talking to vendors all the time. I don't like being harassed because that gets annoying.
Sure.
And
Sure.
you guys have been good. I mean, I think I've talked to you twice in 2 years or 3 years, maybe. But I've heard the name. You guys have,
Mm-hmm.
but I also need to say I've heard the name, but I haven't heard the name. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like
Yeah.
You guys
probably
aren't
our
everywhere.
number one challenge. Yeah, probably our number one challenge is we're really well kept secret. So yeah. And the reason is we spend very little of our budget in sales and marketing. We spend it in product, we spend it in support. And so we've been fortunate to grow mostly by our existing partners' growth and by referral. So, probably the number one thing I get is, I use, example, the 2 you just named. They're very well-known brands. I'd be surprised if any MSP hasn't heard of both of those. And, you could probably name the top 5 that you've heard of, and that we're not one of those. So yeah, but that's entirely fine with us, right? My point is, our philosophy isn't to sell, it's to have a conversation. And if we can help you, Marvin, do something better and deliver more value than you're delivering today for your client, really tangibly, then you'll put us in place. You're a smart guy. If we can't, then that's all we need to just talk about, and so anyway, we get referrals, we grow. Every once in a while we do, we just reached out to you and said, how's it going? And so, I think you covered this at the beginning, but I appreciate the opportunity to be on here because whether or not you start using this, it'd be great if you do, but it's just a good conversation. I'd rather hear why you're doing it and why not, and learn, and love to hear, comments and that sort of thing of what people love about others, or why, if they're able to accomplish something or not. And that's the main thing. Like, if we're not growing, if we're not learning, we're not growing, as a company, as an individual, but as a company. And so we want to understand what that is. And that's because a long time ago, before I helped start Servosity, we were the beginnings of an MSP. So I used to know what it was like to walk in your shoes. It's been a long time. And so now, that's all we do is work with MSPs. So again, if we can help, fantastic. And it's probably a little bit like most MSPs, maybe we're not the sharp dressed IBM sales guy that can talk you into anything, but if we can help you do better than what you're doing now, then you'll probably, do business with us.
Right. Well, and we talked about this, that, regardless of whether I use you or not, you're a vendor in the channel, a vendor that I've heard good stuff about. And the least that I can do is, one, not hang up on you when you call, but two, provide an opportunity for other techs to hear about you, because just because I don't use you doesn't mean that, somebody else shouldn't use you. So I'd like to give everybody, every option out there. And, my goal is hopefully to talk to every vendor so that everybody, hears everybody and makes the choice that works for them. And, if it helps me at some point, great. I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't mind giving you guys a fair shot. But I just like to be upfront and say, I don't like to change. So don't hate me for not rushing right in.
It's an uphill battle. I enjoy this because you said, hey, I'm not, I don't want to really have a normal conversation. I want you to come on the podcast and let's talk about it. And I said, you know what? You don't know hardly anything about us, and you're not using us, and we didn't pay you a cent. So it makes for good discussion because you don't owe us anything. And so, we can talk very candidly, and you can say, I think this is better. I think it's worse. And you can ask very direct questions, and everybody can. And there's no, oh, Mal, they really, sponsored Marvin. So now he's, out there making stuff up for them. So I'd rather have a candid conversation.
No sponsor. Yeah. And my listeners that have been with me know that we don't do sponsors anymore. One, because it's too much of a pain to try to go out and get sponsors and then keep them happy and all this stuff. And, this is a show for techs. So, let's keep things real, and hopefully, vendors will come on and be real as well. So that's what we're doing. So let's do this. We've abandoned the whole, essential components of the managed backup. Let's continue what we were going with. Let's talk about, why people may not have heard of you. You guys have been around, when I looked you up, since 2005.
That's right.
So that's a long time to be around and not be one of the, brand names in our industry. And I don't even know if that's the right thing to say. So
yeah, that's fair.
If I said it incorrectly, I'm sorry, but
No. We get this question all the time. And I think it's a philosophy thing, right? Our philosophy is we need to do the best job. So our mission is to make the world's servers uncrashable. It turns out that's a little harder than we thought when we started. And so the reason I bring that up is, as an industry, we're nowhere close to that, us included. We continue to make strides in that direction. But until we solve that problem, we're not willing to give up. And that also drives our other core philosophy, which is, this is not an ego race or the most eyeballs or the most customers and logos. I don't need to raise tens or $100 million to get, 68% market share or whatever that is. I put my own money in it when we started. We are a cash flow positive, profitable company, and hiring, at the moment during COVID, for multiple positions. So we are very blessed and fortunate to be, still be cash flow positive and profitable during COVID, and even more so to be hiring. And so, but because of that, we don't. I don't think we've ever been to a trade show, ever.
Really?
You know, never been to a single trade show. I hear
Get
they're
out.
cool. We've never been to one. So
Not even undercover?
No. We've been invited to some of them, and they want us to come as an attendee and then sell us the packages. Maybe it'd be a great investment. I'm not saying we never will, but we've been at this since 2005. This is still the early days, right? And what I mean by that is we spent the first 5 years on product development before we really, had an offering. And so this is still the early days in terms of we need to be focused on MSPs, and we need to be focused on what we're delivering. And then, so maybe we'll do that, but we need to be focused on that core offering. And then, and my point is, if we're doing a great job, you'll grow with us. If we're doing a really great job, you'll tell others about us. And that's our growth strategy so far. Maybe that's not the Fortune 500 success story, the startup, unicorn $1 billion valuation. But I am focused, and we're focused on solving this problem. And whether that takes, another 5 or 10 or 15 years, so be it. And what I know is if we do that, if we really solve this problem well and take care of MSPs, then the rest of it will take care of itself. And, I realized several years in, if I were doing this to become rich overnight, I should have done other things. I should have bought lottery tickets and things like that. So, you got to understand why you're doing things and what your motivation is.
Okay. So let's talk about the start. Now, you mentioned earlier that you were partially an MSP or the beginnings of an MSP. So what happened with that made you turn to Servosity full time? Or
so I was like from 99 to 05 before I started Servosity, part of nobody called it MSP at the time, right? But we were hourly and break fix, and think about 99. That was when building computers was a thing, and so we built computers and sold them and did networking. But we thought we were pretty cool because we had like these recurring contracts, right, where we would charge people every month and try to keep them running and not just charge them a fortune whenever they broke. And so we thought that aligned with our values and the value, instead of saying, well, I hope they break and we get to charge them $10,000 this month, how about we just charge them $1,000 a month and try to make sure they don't break. So, everybody understands the value prop of MSP now, but that's what we were on to. But I was tasked with looking at the backup and DR piece. And I, at the time, tried every product on the market, even ones that weren't in English in other markets, and tried everything. And everything sucked or was overpriced or both. Now, there's some great choices out there in addition to Servosity today, but that wasn't the case then. So anyway, they continued to do their thing, and I left to create Servosity.
Okay, interesting. I'm sorry, I just zoned out because when you were talking about other products out there, I just had a conversation yesterday with a company that I haven't used them in 6 years, but I was still on their list and I was still a partner, and they were a product that I used whenever we had on-premise Exchange servers.
Yeah,
and
I remember those.
I purchased, and I finally wrote them and said, I don't think I need to be a partner anymore. And they were like, really? And I said, no, we're good. And I told them, pretty much the same story. I tell you, I've, switched over. We're doing managed services. My products have them, and I've got this. And so they were like, okay, but that was an expensive product at the time that probably wouldn't. I mean, they're surviving. It's still a good company. I'm not going to, badmouth them and say there was anything wrong, but they just weren't a fit for, the framework that I was building with the managed service that I provide. So I can understand back in, 99 to 2005, because I was doing retainers back then.
Yeah, so you're ahead of it. That's practically managed services.
That was a word that attorneys understood.
Yep.
pay me a monthly retainer and I'll be here when you need me. They're like, okay.
Yep.
So, all right. And then you say you spent the first 5 years really developing the product. So, I mean, you had to be selling some to get out there. And how did you decide on, managed service providers?
So the part I left out is I had built a web app development and hosting company that I ran. And so I, did well with that, and I sold it in 2010. And so it was what supplied my income and the ability to pour every profit I made out of there into building Servosity. And then I sold that company, and then poured all that into Servosity. So so I've been doubling down on Servosity since before it was a thing. So yeah, that was my strategy. And let me be clear: when I sold that, I became a 10,000aire. So I mean, let's be clear: this is not the Silicon Valley. I sold it, and I don't need to work anymore. And we made more revenue than that, but turns out there's no value in selling custom web app development, because it's there and you make a lot of money when you do it, and then it's gone. But we've done enough of that we ran a 24/7 hosting operation, Windows and Linux, and that exasperated my earlier experience because I wanted to make sure we protect our clients' data and that we weren't going to be down. But we were the
Right.
hosting, and like modern days, this is hard to imagine. We not only hosted their websites, we hosted their email, right? That seems weird now, and their DNS. And so, it wasn't lost on me the fact that people weren't going to be happy if their website was down. They were going to be even less happy that they couldn't send or receive any emails. And I'll never forget, we had a hospital, an entire hospital system that we hosted a few web apps. It would have not been great, but it wouldn't have been critical had we gone down. But for whatever reason, they decided to have us run their entire DNS. And the thing is, this probably 5,500 employee healthcare system would have been unable to communicate, email or otherwise, even though we weren't running their email because of DNS, had we gone down. So, the fact was not lost on me that being up and being back up and running quickly was critical. But the stuff at that day and age really was pretty crude. So,
Yeah.
I had seen everybody else struggle with it, then we struggled with it. And I never set out to create Servosity. I set out to find a good solution, but I couldn't find one then. So enough people are like, try to do it. So I, started like most people did. I scripted some things, I cobbled some things together, and then they said, "Can you do this?" And then, we decided to build it for ourselves. And then more and more people said, "Can we use it too? Can we buy it from you and sell it to our clients?" And then I was like, "Gee, I know a thing or two about MSPs. Maybe selling it to them would be a bright idea." So, I didn't set out with this great business plan day one that we're going to conquer the MSP world. It was very much, we had a problem, let's solve it. And hey, MSPs keep asking us for this. Maybe there's something to it. And so very humble beginnings. And that's how it's continued. We listen, figure out what it is, where the gaps are. And, we do our best to solve those, address them, and try to do that in a meaningful and intentional way, not just a marketing flash in the
Right.
pan or the latest cool whiz bang feature.
All right. So the website for everybody listening, that we can probably should have said it, servosity.com, and that's spelled Servosity. And I mean, it's pretty simple. And well, your website says incredibly simple backup and disaster recovery. So I guess for the listeners that really don't know, and you needed to give them a quick sales pitch or a quick synopsis of what Servosity is and does, what would that be?
So we are for MSPs and the channel only, right? So you can't buy it direct. You've got to be in Marvin's position or that kind of thing. And we, we're an inch wide but a mile deep, and so we don't know all the things about being an MSP, but we are experts, and our team is experts in backup and DR. And so what I mean by that is we usually start by solving one problem. You can't, like, in your world, you've got your two different solutions. If you only had one of those, we have backup products and we have DR products. So we'll often meet you wherever your need is. And then, we don't have, big sales pitches or any of that. It's the puppy dog close. You take us home, you fall in love with us, and you can't give us back. So if you don't love us, then give us back. But that's not something that happens too often. So yeah, that's how that works. And you brought up, so just to tie into what you were saying earlier, not make this really so much of a sales pitch, but be conversational. We have a different philosophy than others, I think, in this. And so our philosophy is to be the simplest possible. So that goes from our product to our pricing model. Our pricing model is flat rate, unlimited storage. So if you know how many servers or VMs you have, you know what the price is. You don't have to worry if it's 500 gigs or 5 terabytes. So our partners tend to like that. That leads to more predictable margins. If you have a big customer and a small customer, you don't have to charge the one that has a ton of storage, 10 times as much money. And if they upgrade their system, you don't have to go back to them 6 months later and say, I told you it's $200 a month, but now it's really $400 a month because you're storing more data than you used to. And they look at you and go, it's the same server. Like, what? I don't know that I upgraded. Windows upgrade, my app upgraded. What are you talking about? So we don't want to put you in that awkward spot. So that is just one example of where we try to make it simple and not have all these nickel and dime charges. So you've got predictability to your customer. If that makes any sense.
It does. And I was going to say, first, how in the world can you do that? Because the tendency will be for MSPs to take advantage of that and try to, store get as much as possible in those backups, because backup does get costly for the people that do the tiers. When they add price per gigabyte, it starts to add up.
It's interesting. We have no price per gig, and we weren't this way. So we've been unlimited for over 5 years. So it's not a new thing for us. Again, it kind of comes back to philosophy. We just kept listening to our MSPs, and the good guys would go land a new client, be like you. They would say, you got to switch to our system because this is the one we understand and we can monitor and we can manage and we can recover, and we're already experts in it. And you got to switch to it. And they'd land a new customer, and they'd say, it's this much for a managed service contract, and the backup portion of that's $200. And they go back 6 months later, and they've done an upgrade, and now it's $400 a month. And that's a pretty big difference to most businesses. And so the good MSP was looking like a bait and switch operation. The guy would look at him and be like, you told me this, now you're telling me this. How much can I trust you? And that really put them in a bad situation. So after a long time of listening and looking at the data set, we know that you'll add a client that we'll lose money on, but we also statistically know you're not statistically going to add all of those. They're all super high storage. So there's only 2 limits to our unlimited plan. One, the default is a year of retention in the cloud, and you can upgrade that as many as you like, but that's the default. And 2, it's just for that device or VM. So you got to pay extra if you were trying to back up 20 servers. You got to pay per server. We try to make it, again, simple to understand, no, fine print terms and conditions. Lastly, we've developed patented technology to not only store the data in public cloud, but to spin up in public cloud. And that's key for disaster recovery. And so we used to, even as a smaller business compared to some of these Fortune 500 names you're talking about, or these, big brands, at one point I was signing my name to $250,000 of new hardware as often as quarterly. So, which is pretty funny because, if we didn't make that payment, it's not like I was going to come up with that personally, but we were
no
scaling it
personal
up.
guarantee on that.
Yeah, we're personal guaranteeing, how it is as a business. So I was personal guaranteeing that. And the thing is, you look at it and where we're spending money, and I felt like we were a hosting or data center operator. And so we spent years working on technology, some of which is patented, that allows us to do things that others can't. And so today we're partnered with Amazon Web Services. So we used to be in a data center or two and have some compliance and some level of sophistication. And to our competitors that raised tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, we were a laggard. What's interesting now is we're a leader instead of a laggard, because they've spent, 10, 15 million bucks every time they turn up a data center. And, I want to say Azure spent 15 billion last year, and Amazon was somewhere similar in their, data center spend, and we're leveraging that. So it gives us unprecedented speed, flexibility, security, and then the thing that's flipped for us is compliance. So we used to say, well, we can deal with HIPAA, but maybe not PCI, or maybe not Sarbanes-Oxley, or, and we were evolving to those. And now, as a company, we've matured, but also we're leveraging, AWS. It's, now we excel. Now we've, without naming names, one of the two providers you're using, we just had somebody come to us and said, we've got to do some stuff with some DoD subcontractors. And, we need a certain level of compliance. Well, Amazon runs the cloud for the CIA, and we have access to the Gov cloud. So there's some interesting, this is me being a little geeky when I say that, having access to all that power and tools but it gives us a different perspective on that, and in some cases advantages.
Okay, so let me ask some other geeky questions, because
Please.
The questions are going to be, so if we're buying Servosity, are we buying software? Are we buying storage? Are we buying appliances? What is it that we're actually getting?
Yeah, so the simple answer to that question is you are getting the infrastructure and software. The fact that we're using Amazon is transparent to you. Like, we're transparent that we're using it. You'll never touch Amazon. You don't have to figure out the pricing model. Our DR team sets up for every single customer you set up. You get your own isolated virtual private cloud, which is the highest level of isolation in its own org. And that's just a bunch of technical jargon to say that our team does all the heavy lifting, so that you can spin up in the cloud and your customers have all the capabilities. You don't have to know how to spell AWS for us to do that. If you choose our unlimited plan, the ability to have unlimited data and spin up in the cloud with our DR offerings is included, and we do all that for you. So all that's built in. On the other hand, kind of simple and flexibility, one thing that makes us different is we don't sell hardware. We're hardware agnostic. It's a fancy way of saying we feel like you can buy hardware at least as well as we can. And there are some that see that as a drawback, and others that see that as a fantastic advantage. And, we've seen so many partners end up with a couple like you did, right? For example, I don't generally hear bad things about Data. I hear wonderful things. They've got to be one of our best competitors. They're probably the best known there is. And SolarWinds, great brand, right? But, there's this reason you have two. And so a lot of the partners, it maybe they can't do something that one of them did, but a lot of them, they're frustrated because they want all their clients to have DR and they can't. And so between our unlimited storage offering or the fact that we don't require an appliance, that makes you more flexible. So to break that down into something tangible, basically, if you like the appliance model, you want to have a server sitting there so that you can virtualize them. We fully support that. You just supply your favorite box with your favorite Windows OS. Most of our partners just choose Windows 10. If you supply a Windows 10 box, our software turns it into a VDR, and now you have the ability to virtualize on that. It takes a minute or two, and you're spun up. So at a big picture level, it's probably similar to what you've got now, and the ability to spin up in the cloud as well. So high level, similar, but you can spec the hardware to just the right size instead of fitting one of the sizes we sell. Even more popular, Marvin, if you have customers that are more budget constrained, to maybe look at you, for example. I'm not saying you would, but you might choose to use Servosity for your SolarWinds customers. Now, if you take us home, you're going to end up throwing out both the others long term. But that's how we win. You find one like SolarWinds, and you decide that maybe I can offer Servosity for a similar pricing model as them. And I'm making this up. I don't know what your pricing model is, but the part that actually matters besides our pricing is you can have this dedicated server sitting there, which is more like what Datto does today. And if I'm wrong on either of your current vendors, please speak up. But the other option that's really popular is you can do what we call a shared BDR. And so instead of buying a couple $1,000 piece of hardware to sit there all day long, that all it does is wait for something to break, you can supply just storage. And so that's typically a NAS. It could be something, if it's a single server little site, like we've got MSPs that focus on dentists, that all they have is a single server and it's not an incredibly intensive workload. In those cases, they'll supply a USB hard drive. That's it, plus our software. So in that model, we image those servers, we store them on the NAS or USB hard drive. We also store them in the cloud. You can boot up in the cloud, but what people want to do is boot up locally. So in that model, you sell this to 10 or 20 of your customers. You keep a spare server standing by at your office. When they crash, you drive it over, you boot it up, you point it at the NAS. The thing that I think is cool or different is the time it takes you to boot up is the same as you had a dedicated BDR. You click the same button. You're about a minute or two away from your OS starting. You don't have to move terabytes of data over. We're able to boot in place using your data on the NAS and using your compute on the loaner server. So, the only difference in recovery from a dedicated BDR to a shared BDR is your commute time. But now you don't have to put out a couple $1,000 appliance or server. So the reason we did this is listening to our customers, and a lot of them say, now I can use Servosity instead of SolarWinds, and I'm not beating it up, but just to name two you're using, because now I can deliver it for a similar price. Maybe it's $10 more, maybe it's the same. I'm making these things up, but it's similar enough. It's not in the shared BDR approach, it's often cheaper than what you're talking about on your higher end one. And my point is, most MSPs would like to have DR for all their customers, but budget's a real thing.
Right.
So that, does that make any sense at all?
Well, it does. And now you've piqued my interest.
Okay.
because here's the thing. So part of the reason I have the two I have, one, SolarWinds, the backup is part of my RMM platform. So it's right there in the dashboard, which was a question I was going to ask you about, your MSP dashboard. So I didn't have to go someplace else for those, quick and easy backup solutions.
Yeah.
I did pick Datto because of a certain number of reasons, some of which is I wanted somebody to support the hardware. I didn't want to support it.
Yep.
I wanted all those things we talked about at the beginning of the show with, the local and the cloud. I wanted it testing and stuff like that. And Datto has some of that built-in testing that I don't have to worry about myself. They've got the 24/7 support. But I also know Datto's pricey. And people, like you said, budgets are real. So I do have customers that are going to come to me and say, look, we got to cut this down, because I can't spend $1,000 a month on backup because of that. So, so you've piqued my interest because I've got to look at that. So interesting. Now, I did have a question. Please. You said your default is 1 year retention.
That's correct. In the cloud.
How did you choose 1 year? Because most of them don't have that as a default.
We talked to our customers and we realized that, at least 80% a year was going to be sufficient. And the other industries are regulated to the point where they're probably going to need to pay for more. So we have the ability to have more. We used to charge per gig, and you could set your retention at whatever you'd like. The problem is, one of the ways that people try to save money is they make their retention 2 weeks or 30 days. The problem is you will get bit if you make it too low. And we saw that happen in MSPs. So while we know budget's a real thing, we for example, have evolved to where you can make some cheaper choices on hardware and it still not bite you, but you're able to have that longer retention. So we wanted to say, how do we just build in the retention? The other the other, we used to operate data centers like our competitors. We used to buy gear like our competitors. Now, God, trust me, signing with that pen very shakily when I, every time I personally guaranteed another 200, 300,000 bucks, but that's small compared to, some of the brand names you're talking about. But the thing is, when you build a data center, it does certain things and only those. And we're leveraging the power of our partnership with Amazon. So one of the things that I always had to do was buy capacity well ahead of the need, which was a big expense. And so, being that we're leveraging public cloud, if we gain 100 terabytes this month or a petabyte, it's just entirely variable, right? And so I know that if we do that, we're still adding business and, that it pays for itself, but I don't have to, buy another $250,000 or another $1 million worth of equipment ahead of time. And so it's our partnership and the technology we developed that gives us that flexibility, and unlimited storage with the year retention is just one of the examples. There's several others, but it's just one of the examples that, I think right now we look a little bit like some of your two you just used, with a few differences. And I think in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we'll probably look vastly differently. And it doesn't mean they're bad and we're good. It just means that we have a philosophical view of the world based on our MSPs, and they have a seemingly different view.
Okay. I was going to ask you about the shared BDR, but we can wait on that. Let's go back to the system is designed for MSPs.
Yes.
And I mentioned the fact that I like the fact that mine is in the dashboard. So one of the problems I have with another vendor in another category is that in order for me to switch between my customers, I have to log out and log back in.
That's crazy.
And everything is switched up. So tell me a little bit about your dashboard in terms of, what do we see as MSPs and how we manage our customers?
Yeah, as you'd imagine, it's all multi-tenant and multi-user. So and when I say that, you can have, all your team in there. They, can all have MFA. An important thing that we rolled out earlier this year is, MFA being optional is one thing, but we now have enforced MFA so that it's enforced globally. And so you and your engineers have the ability to be in there, see everything, single pane of glass across all customers, all devices, irregardless of, Office 365 backing up a Mac laptop or imaging all your critical Windows servers. You can see the single pane of glass across all customers, all OSs, all platforms. And, but then most MSPs give their clients no access, which is probably a good thing in most scenarios, but it's all easy to give your customers access at whatever level you like, right? They can just get some email reports. They can log into the same dashboard that you do, but just to see a subset of their data. They can do self-service restores if you'd like them to. You can give an IT administrator at a company the ability to manage any of his devices, or you can give Susie the ability to restore her data and see her reports only. So you always have a single point of view, and then you can invite your customers in at whatever level. And then the other point I wanted to just mention as a highlight is, if you're not doing MFA with the rise of cyber attacks, you're going to regret it, and at some point. And my point is, this year we've seen a sharp increase in the hackers and ransomware targeting the backups. I remember it was about a year or two ago, we picked up a customer because a consumer grade one didn't have a login or any credentials. They could open up the app in Windows, and then once they were opening the app, they could just hit delete all the backup data. And so so they did that and then encrypted the data. And so they came to us. A few years ago, we've always had credentials, username and password, and encryption key to get into a device. Now we also have MFA, and so the reason I mention that is, if you choose to globally enforce it, which is what we recommend, it would make sure that any of your engineers, and if you allow any of your customers, would all be forced to use MFA in order to access it. And the point I wanted to make is, we're in an arms race with hackers, and the old fluffy ransomware of last year just encrypted your data. Now the hackers are going in and waiting weeks. Sometimes we've had customers, MSPs, their customers were infected for months. The MSP or the customer had no idea. One of the worst ones I've seen is they waited until the MSP remoted into the server and then logged into the backup software and ran keyloggers the whole time. MSP tested their backups, ran brand name security software, and so they were responsible, but they had no idea. And the reason they did that is they waited till a Saturday, and they had a coordinated planned attack to start encrypting data and start accessing the backups and trying to delete them simultaneously. So I don't say this to scare or drive any fear, uncertainty, doubt. It's just that, if you're not doing MFA, you will be eventually, because something like this will happen. And so you want to have good MFA. And my point is single pane of glass, invite your customers in, but don't make them the weak point, because, they're likely to do the least secure thing possible.
Right.
So you can make sure that happens across the board.
All right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do have customers where there is a junior on site, so either a desktop or an IT person, and they do want the ability to be able to at least do restores. So I usually give them that access, but I don't give them much more than that. So that is good. And forcing the MFA is good as well. Now, ransomware is huge now. And one of the things that I've liked, I don't even know if the one does it, but one does, where they have ransomware detection built into the backup. So do you guys have that in yours?
We do not. So,
okay.
We believe that that's a best of breed security tool, not necessarily a backup or DR tool. So rightly or wrongly, that's what we believe. And the problem with that is, unless we're going to spend the effort to be the best in security, the thing is, ransomware is evolving, so you don't detect it, right? That's why they're trying to get past your security suite.
Right.
I'm not arrogant enough to think that we can innovate in backup and DR and innovate in the ransomware detection business. And my problem is, if I tell you we will detect ransomware, we might detect the known strains, but we're not going to detect tomorrow's strain. And
right.
so I feel like that could give you a false sense of security. And I don't want that to be the case. So we don't, but the versioning is your safety net, right? We often back up encrypted data, because you get it on a weekend and the client calls you on a Monday or a Tuesday. This is going to be a Labor Day weekend here coming up. So, you're going to get some calls on Tuesday saying you got ransomware. Some of you guys will probably. And so you're going to have 3 or 4 days of backups of encrypted data. And so, we can back up all the way to every 15 minutes. And so you can be very granular in where you restore. You have the ability to compare versions to see where the ransomware was introduced. So we give you the tools to understand when it occurred and why, and only restore the right version. But, either they're going to tell you it's down, or you're going to notice that you're uploading terabytes of data where you only normally upload a few gigs. Right. And that's really going to be your warning signals. And ours will alert you if your backup doesn't complete within a 24-hour period. So if they encrypt all your data, it will cause all of it to re-upload. And very likely, if you have much data, that's going to take you longer than a day. So if you look at why is my backup taking longer than a day, then that might be the cause.
Yeah. So you had mentioned my mind just went blank. First, let me say that we had somebody ask, they joined the broadcast late, what is the website for this backup? I just put it in the chat. And for those of you that are joining, Servosity is who we're talking with. And I've put the link in both YouTube and the Facebook.
Awesome.
So that is there.
Thank you, Mark.
And all right, where was I going before? Oh, searching. So one of the problems that my customer has with the Datto product, they love, the stuff that it does, but restoring, they can't search across multiple restore points. So that's a question that if I were, really considering changing, that's a question I need to ask is, how easy is it to search across restore points? Yeah,
it's a good question. There's 2 answers to that. The default is no better. Okay. I've not used theirs, but just to be very candid, the default is no better. If you're going to do frequent restores, unlike Datto, as far as I'm aware, we have an imaging product and a file backup product. Normally, if you're doing the imaging product, you do that, and then we give you the ability to restore files all built into that. However, there's some niceties to having the files in our file backup product. So we have the ability to also have a file level backup, which we'll recommend if you're doing frequent restores of certain sets of data. And the reason is you can give the user the ability to do just that and not mess with the imaging, but also you have the ability to, when we're imaging the system, we just understand we have C or D or blocks thereof. And until you go and kind of extrapolate that, it's harder to get to the searching of that. And so for those reasons, you built in for no additional cost. If you'd like to just enable it, you can also search across versions at file level. You just have to enable that as options. So the default is probably no better, but it's built in, no extra cost. Make it easier to find those versions, because I feel like most people, they're like, I need the latest version of whatever. Well, when is that from? I have no idea.
Right.
Sometime in the last 6 months.
Right. I have that happen all the time. With like, well, I need the latest version, or I need such and such. And at least with law firms, it's a little easier because we can go into their case management system and at least find out when it was edited.
Right.
So then I know, okay, well, you didn't edit this, for the last month. So at least I know I can go back a month instead of starting at the latest and working backwards. So, okay.
Yeah. And,
all right.
In their defense, as weird as that may sound, in our imaging product, we don't, because we're looking at the imaging. If we layer on our file backup product, we actually pull into the reports every single changed file or new file or deleted file, and all of that's logged, and that gives the insight to basically easily find what happened. And without a doubt, on this particular day, these files were changed, these files were deleted, these files were new. Even permissions were changed, so you can understand at a granular level, and that can be helpful in those kind of use cases.
All right, sweet. So let's go back and try to tie up where we started with talking about the essentials. You talked about the fact that backup is probably the most used, most misunderstood, cheapest for a reason.
Yep.
Everybody's kind of understood the disaster recovery, but then they get disaster recovery and continuity mixed up.
Yeah.
Which I think it's pretty simple in my mind, but I know it's not in everybody's, that, disaster recovery is not continuity. Continuity is not disaster recovery.
Right.
Is that fair to say that?
It is, right. I mean, I think it matters more what people think and what is the public think, but than particular terms. But yeah, the thing is, we call it backup and disaster recovery, even though we're evolving more to business continuity. And the reason is that seems to be what resonates with people. But it's a pretty horrible naming, and I don't really recommend that you call it that with your customer, because I found that most of the end clients frame a disaster as a tornado or a fire, and most of the disasters are going to be ransomware or Windows update blue screens the server, or the hardware has failed. Those are the most likely causes of and my point is, the disaster is they can't work for a week. Right. They really think of it in that terms, and so sometimes when you call it disaster recovery, they think, well, that's nice to have. I won't need that. I mean, what are the odds of my building burning down? The answer to what are the odds of your building burning down, your insurance company can tell you, fairly low, or they wouldn't insure you. But there's the far more obvious cases that are going to cause downtime and outages. And I'm glad you brought this up, because I did say backup is the cheapest, but it's actually usually the worst ROI. And my point is, I'm making up numbers. If it was $20 a month for backup and $100 for imaging, wow, that's a $80 a month difference. Well, if you're down one time in 3 years for a week, if you're a single person law firm, $250 an hour times a week, you wish you'd spent that $80 a month. And the odds of them being down once in even 3 or 4 years are fairly high. Whether it's ransomware, whether it's extended power outages like California is going through, or just hardware failures. other Windows updates, thanks to those, they blue screen.
Yeah, that's true.
So we all know that. So the odds of them needing to use it are far more than insurance. And that should hopefully be a good part of your conversation, right? This is not just insurance. It happens to also be insurance, but you're going to use this. I don't know what your thoughts are, but it seems like the odds of a customer being with you for 10 years and not using that ever are, less likely than the other alternative.
Interesting. So, I mean, if I had to judge based on my experience, so a couple of customers have had catastrophes. I mean, I live in Hurricane Alley down here. I mean, so we have those all the time. And so they've had those types of things. I just left a customer this morning. Let me rephrase that. They're not really my customer. They used to be a long time ago. And then they had it's a government thing. So it wasn't that they fired me. They changed governments and did all this stuff. They went in-house. But one of their vendors still calls me to come out and do their stuff. It's an airport, and they're what they call the digital logger machine. It's what records the sounds of the airport and the aircraft's taking off, and it's a whole weird thing. They just spent 2 months out of commission.
Wow.
Because their server for the logging system got hit by lightning. And there's no backup for that system. Wow. And unfortunately, it's not my place to tell them you need a backup. But,
right.
But it's amazing that how many people live life like that.
Yeah. Well, that's why you weren't their MSP, but you're doing a disservice if you don't make sure they have every critical system, if you are their MSP, protected. And, I would say the average MSP is probably more like you, Marvin, where they have a backup offering and a DR offering, and the DR offering costs more. But I'd love your input, but I don't think I've met anybody that wouldn't rather have all their customers on DR.
Well, we'd love it, but we'd love it. But the reality is, not everybody drives a Cadillac. Some people.
That's right.
Some people drive a Dodge Neon.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's, we've innovated a little bit on the pricing, but also that's where we talked about the shared BDR, and it doesn't eliminate the gap, but it closes the gap significantly. So instead of, our fictitious $80 example a month, most of ours, it's a $20 or $30 difference a month in real world price between the two. So they're still the cheaper ones, but we just listen to our customers and we're trying to drive those closer, right? So that you have less and less on the backup, because nobody wants to spend a week doing that and them calling you or staring at you all day long while you rebuild servers. So,
yep. Or wait for it to download.
Exactly. Nobody wants to do that. Not at all.
All right. Well, Damien, I have to say thank you for coming on the show, and for two guys who weren't really sure what we were going to talk about. We talked about a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate this. I love being off the cuff, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk shop. And, my goal hopefully is to be as neutral as I can possibly be, right? Happy to talk about differences as you ask, but, there's a difference in our philosophies. There's a difference in our product. And so happy to talk about it. But, you've got some amazing, companies you're using now, at least from what I hear from other MSPs. You and everybody else listening, if there's some reason that what we're doing resonates, then reach out and talk with us. If it isn't, then fantastic. You're probably using the right solution.
All right. So I will just throw this up there for those of you watching on video. The website, servosity.com. Be sure to go there and check them out. If you want to contact them to look at their partnership program, you can actually just send an email, partners@servosity.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. I wrote that down correctly. And we have been chatting with Damien Stevens, the CEO. You don't call yourself the founder.
Founder, CEO, chief janitor, whatever it takes, right? Yep. Doing a lot of hiring nowadays, so a little less of that. But yeah, that's exactly right. Founder, CEO, whatever,
All right.
whatever lets people, I'd rather just have a candid conversation. So, whatever is the least intimidating is really what I'd rather go with.
All right. Well, like I told you, you intrigued me. So I think we'll be having a conversation here real soon, sooner than I thought we would. So we'll
Fair
talk
enough.
about that. And for those of you watching and listening, I want to thank you for your participation. Thank you for supporting Podnuts Pro. Be sure to head over to podnuts.com and check out all the great shows we have over there. And if you want to support us, like us on YouTube and the Facebook. That way you can see the videos whenever we post them. The show notes page is over at podnuts.com. It will have the links that we have here, both to Servosity and to some of our other guests and products that we have on. And that is going to do it for this episode of Podnuts Pro. Hopefully this is a show that helps you make your business better, stronger, and faster. That's going to do it. And until next time, holla.